Ladies, gentlemen, and exiles of all ages, as people keep playing Path of Exile 2 and progressing further into the further stretches of the game itself, a good portion of people are now wrapping up the initial run through the campaign through Act 3 and gearing up for cruel difficulty to repeat this. And so with a reasonable amount of experience now under my belt up to this point, and plenty of opportunities to make mistakes myself and learn from them, I thought now would be a good time for a bit of a later game discussion about a number of tips that I have for players at this point that I have learned from my own failings to begin with the idea being most of these will hopefully be useful for just players in general, but some will be relatively specific to this time period of progressing through the game. All that said, I want to start with something particularly specific, which is that the last 3 or so zones within Act 3 will bring you through some absolutely massive zones with very few checkpoints within them. There will be lots of enemies within these zones as well that are really good at either jumping on top of you or behind you, or just sort of cornering you against a wall in general. This section can take a lot of patience to get through, and my best advice for it is specifically that: take it slow, play it extra cautious. Remember that dying here is possibly even multiple minutes worth of progress reset, and just treat it like you don't have the infinite respawns for a little bit, and you'll hopefully be able to reach the end of the section without bursting a blood vessel in your brain. On a somewhat related note to this, I mentioned the main reason is that these enemy types tend to be quite good at sort of surrounding you completely, which just sort of results in death for most people. In which case, may I present to you the skill Ice Nova. This knocks back all nearby enemies. You can cast it whenever you'd like, and the low-level skill version of this has super low casting requirements. You need barely any intelligence at all. This completely does the job if you're using it from a different class and just want the knockback part, and this isn't necessarily the tip in itself so much as an example. As you reach this stage of the game, this is when you really want to start sort of thinking much more openly about how to combine skills and create your proper build. Let's say that your actual damage only relies on 2 or 3 of your skill slots. Your choices then are to either just run with no other slots filled, which is basically a waste of space, or to find utility or defensive options that you can slot in within these empty places. A lot of players will initially feel locked down to only taking skills within their sort of recommended sections, only quarterstaff skills if you're playing a monk, for example. But some of the strongest ways to play this game as a monk are all based around elemental spells that aren't even in the quarterstaff section, all being triggered through other methods. Ice Nova is an example of a spell that any person, any player on any class can pick up at its lowest level to help their survivability and give them some extra utility. But the point of this is just to say in general, hey, have a look at other skills outside of your normal weapon type and class restraints. You are allowed to use anything you meet these stat requirements for, so don't waste that concept. Use it to your advantage. Next up, something far more general, which is loot filters. Obviously, if you aren't new to ARPGs as a genre, you will probably know what loot filters are conceptually, but quite simply, if you don't, they are a way to either make less loot actually appear on the ground in general, so there's less clutter to think about and sort through, or just a way to alternatively highlight drops that should actually deserve your attention for you. Neversink is a well-known filter creator from Path of Exile 1, and they have their first basic loot filter now up and running for Path of Exile 2, so feel free to check them out and get the filter up and running for yourself as well. For now it is relatively basic, but the idea is for the moment not to outright hide any loot and make it not show up in case I missed anything, but instead just to highlight things that are extra valuable, slots that are rare to see like belts or jewelry, item types that are particularly good, higher rarity items, items with sockets or quality, and of course things like currency items like orbs get a very bright color and even make a noise when they drop to just make sure that you catch them and pick them up. It may be a simple concept, but this is a solid quality of life increase from not having it. You don't need to have a loot filter, but it definitely helps, at least in my opinion. Moving on, we have another more specific tip to this section, which has to do with early cruel difficulty in Act 1. Because you are essentially doing the story all over again, you will once again have the first hub town and you will lose access to the hooded one for a short duration. This means you don't have infinite identifying items available for free, and the 2 ways of dealing with this are either 1, use all of the scrolls of wisdom that you probably already started stocking up from the base campaign after you unlock the hidden one to begin with, or 2, teleport back to hub zones within different acts. You can do this from any waypoint, and the hooded one will still be at the camps in these other acts and can identify a full load of inventory once again quite easily. But for obvious reasons, this costs you a fair bit amount more time, as you have to do multiple loading screens to unload your inventory and such each time, but these are the 2 methods of identifying items for the first stages of Act 1 in cruel difficulty, depending on what you want to do. Obviously, there's also the other option of if you're really lazy, you can simply shove everything in your stash and then just sort of deal with it later. Your choice, really. As you progress into cruel difficulty, you will also find that new gear starts to get some pretty hefty stat requirements relatively quickly, so just pay attention to that and make sure you don't go all in on like buying equipment from a vendor that you can't actually equip yet. As well, in the base campaign, there were a bunch of optional bosses or side side quests or activities that you could do that granted you permanent buffs for your player. Things like bonus resistances, forever, or bonus maximum life. We've got a video covering the full list of these already up on the channel, including for cruel difficulty, but the short version for this is that every boss that gave you permanent upgrades in the base campaign will do so again in cruel difficulty, except for the King of the Mist, who you do still eventually have to kill, but you don't get the upgrade from him until you've also killed the Bog Witch in Act 3 again too. Every other one though at least still gives you something, so they are still incredibly worth doing for the permanent player increases even on cruel difficulty. Past this, there is a relatively large bump of immediate difficulty gain from Act 3 into the start of cruel campaign, not completely out of character, it's not unmanageable, but it is palpable, and the main advice that I have for this is to take advantage of the well in town if you haven't already. Especially as you are first getting to grips with cruel as a difficulty type, you will take a fair bit of damage, and if this happens slowly as you clear a map out, you'll probably end up running out of healing flask charges. Because the whole map essentially resets and respawns if you do properly die, instead of just walking into more combat while out of flash charges knowing that you can't heal, you should just use your portal, go back to town, refill up at the well, and then go back into the map. There is simply no reason to just accept death, especially in cruel difficulty, so just keep that in the back of your mind at all times and you can save yourself some pain and some time over the rest of your journey. On a similar note, for how to sort of just deal with things in cruel, this is when you really want to start focusing on sort of defensive priorities on your gear if you haven't already, by which I mean getting your resistances at least somewhat close to their cap, and on armor pieces you want to focus on getting those resistances, getting flat life increases, having sockets in them which you can then put runes in to gain more resistances, and then everything else can sort of come secondarily after that. With enough life increase and resistances though, even the squishiest classes and builds can go from getting 1 or 2 shot to surviving a couple of seconds of beating before imploding even when surrounded, and that can make all of the difference in a lot of this game. A couple of more things then, the first being quite major actually, which is that for whatever reason, the ascendancy points 5, 6, 7, and 8 seem not be working as expected for players. The original intention is of course for the base difficulty of each trial to give 2 ascendancy points each, which is correct, this is functioning as expected, but then the cruel difficulty version of each was suspected to be your source of the final 4 points, specifically if a Jin Barya says that it has 3 trials or more, or if the Inscribed Ultimatum says it has 7 trials or more, but as it turns out, this actually isn't quite the case. It's a bit more specific than that and very much undistinct in the actual game itself, the way that it tells you, and the devs have said that they are looking to make this a bit clearer. Specifically for your Ascension 3, it needs to be a Jin Barya that has area level 60 or above, and 3/4 specifically, or in area level 75, Trial of Chaos, with 10 trials. For the Ascension 4, you must do an area level 75 plus Trial of the Sekimas with 4 floors on it, or for the Trials of Chaos, defeat the Trial Master at the end of a 10 trial run. So this is quite a different thing to what we were expecting. This should help people actually reach their Ascendancy points because it was just unclear before, and hopefully that information will help you actually get this unlocked. That said, on the note of Ascendancy points, and I suppose then skill points in general, this is the best time to sort of go back and take a look at what you're doing in the passive point tree. If you are happy with the skills that you've got running and the general setup of synergy that you are working with, it may be time to look back at your passive point tree and the decisions you've made up until now. If you aren't someone who's been following like a precise build guide from the beginning, chances are reasonable that you've picked up some nodes that are maybe not that important along the way. Maybe some stuff that doesn't quite match what you are now doing at this stage, but it did match what you were doing early, and so one way to improve yourself for just a little bit of a gold cost is to clean up your skill tree, refund the points that need to be refunded, put them into things that actually affect you, and have a look at anything that you'd like to change with these points that you have and do it. As well, it's worth mentioning here, a lot of people don't yet seem to realize that if you want to change the attribute that an attribute node gives you in the passive tree, all you have to do is refund that singular point and pay for that 1 point reset. You don't have to like back up a bunch of nodes back to make the change and pay for all of those nodes to reapply them again, which is honestly really convenient comparatively to what I'd expect, and very cheap as well compared to that. So it's quite nice, and it's not that bad to swap things like that to reach stat requirements. Aside of this, all the normal tips still apply really. Make sure that you use the salvage bench for items with sockets or quality that you don't want to use. Make sure you check your vendors once per level to see their stock updates. Keep using crafting orbs to keep your gear up to date, with one exception that I should make here, which is that the general trading currency in the game is seeming to be exalted orbs. So if you're looking to trade for items at all, try to avoid spending those specifically unless you are really starved for power and need just a little bit of an increase. That just about does it for today, and everyone. Another sort of discussion of some tips that I've got for you all from the mistakes that I was making in the later stages of the original campaign run, as well as the start of Cruel Difficulty 2. I hope you've all enjoyed this, and hopefully at least some of this will help you all out on your continued journey through Path of Exile 2. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, gentlemen. Until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.